Hello, welcome to Krieger TCG, the best place for competitive Pokemon content for non-professional players. My goal with this series will be to explain my run through Players Cup 3 into Global Finals, playing a Rogue archetype with Decidueye here, as you can see on the screen. The goal of this channel is going to be to provide tips and tricks for people who may not have, 40 plus hours per week to dedicate to Pokemon trading card game. I've been able to have some success despite being a full-time medical doctor. So I think the tips I have in that regard may be useful for other people. It's kind of the area that I don't notice a lot of people content producing. Maybe a gap that I can fill, so to speak. So let's get going with the deck profile to start. This is Decidueye going into the North American phase of the qualifier for Players Cup 3, top 256. The meta was very well settled, and that's a great time to play a rogue deck. The sort of definitive lists for the main archetypes had been established, which makes, in my opinion, a counter pick really strong. Another thing that helped is there was very strong consensus among top players that the best way to play ADPZ is to play 2 Mawiles and no Aegislash-V. And if you know how to navigate the matchup, that's still very, very favorable for Decidueye deck. Also, Lucario Melmetal had been cutting Stealthyhood almost completely, which lets you beat them, another very popular deck, with only a 1-card tech in the case of this Phione. So it was in a very strong meta spot. Essentially, when Zacian decks are not teching for Decidueye, I think it's one of the best decks in the format. Real quick, I'll explain why I prefer Decidueye to Altaria as another deck that walls Pokemon V and Pokemon GX damage. Decidueye has more HP and it does more damage, meaning that it's much stronger against kind of natural counters to Altaria, such as Tapu Prism Star and Pikarom. They can one-shot Altarias with that, and it ends up not even being a super favorable matchup. But the fact that Decidueye can tank a hit and potentially knock out the Tapu Prism in essentially one turn makes it a very, very favorable matchup. So because it's stronger against the natural counters, I think it's worth overcoming the inconsistency of being a stage 2 deck to try to optimize your matchup spread. That's another thing that'll be a recurring theme on this channel is if you're playing a rogue deck, a counter deck, you want to tech hard. Max consistency is what everybody preaches when they play meta decks, and it's true for that. But if you're playing a rogue deck, you want to have the best matchup spread rather than the best internal consistency. So we'll get into more of that later. But that's essentially why I chose the deck for this tournament. Now we'll get into the specifics of the list here. Our main consistency Pokemon are Stellar Wish, Jirachi, and Snorlax with Gormandi's ability. You use these to draw cards and set up. And setting up can be difficult, given that we need to have multiple basics down so they don't just get knocked out, and then we can evolve them up into our Decidueyes and wall like we want to. It's going to be our strategy in the vast majority of matchups. So having 2 Jirachis and 1 Snorlax, they're great starters. If not, you can search them out with Quick Balls or Capture Energy or Pokemon Communication. Once you get them down, you can start drawing through your deck and making your hand stronger throughout the game. They're very important. The reason we play 2 Jirachi and 1 Snorlax is so that we can use Stellar Wish and then continue to do other things throughout our turn. Snorlax is much more situational. If I do use it, it's usually on the first turn of the game when I can mostly play my hand down and then draw up. And you expect it to get knocked out after that. You probably only get 1 use. Whereas Jirachi, you may end up scoop up netting it or getting it to the bench somehow, using it multiple times throughout the game. It has more overall utility of being able to grab a card for you and let you continue your turn. The most frequent time that I use Jirachi is when I have Rosa in hand and I'm looking for 2 item cards. I like to have a Jirachi on the bench that I can promote after one of my Pokemon get knocked out. I can Stellar Wish, find one of the 2 cards I'm looking for, and then Rosa afterward to grab the missing piece. And this helps you set up an unblockable late game situation with multiple Decidueyes. So those are the support Pokemon. Mewtwo is a very important Pokemon as well for getting your supporters back and mainly for protecting against Marnie. Playing a Stage 2 deck, you're very susceptible to hand disruption, and you're susceptible to bricking in the mid game. So when there's still in the setup phase and you can't afford to be dead drawing, you want to use this Mewtwo pretty aggressively in the first couple turns of the game to leave a supporter on top of your deck. That way, if you get Marnied, you can draw into a Rosa or a Professor's Research or a Bird Keeper, whatever your optimal supporter is for next turn. You want to have that on top of your deck to protect against Marnie. This saves you so many games. Matchups you should win on paper just by getting 1 or 2 Decidueyes out, you can still lose those games by bricking. So having consistency in the form of supporter recovery makes Mewtwo one of my favorite cards in the deck. Even with all these heavy supporter counts, you need Mewtwo to put supporters guaranteed on top of your deck to protect against Marnie. The next type of Pokemon is this Mew, protects against sniping from Cramorant, also from Pikarom in some situations. This just helps protect your Decidueyes on the bench from getting sniped. You want to keep them safe. The Zigzagoon is here for damage fixing. In combination with Scoop Up Net, you can actually rack up some damage with this and get key knockouts on something like an Yveltal and an Eternatus deck. You can also supplement the spread damage from Splitting Arrow to take cheap knockouts on the bench against stuff like Mad Party. So the Zigzagoon is very useful. Don't play the full Obstagoon line anymore, but there's still those times where you're just a couple damage counters short of doing what you need to do. Zigzagoon's perfect for that. The Hoopa is a tech attacker. This is just good for general utility. It has a little bit of extra HP. And you can attack for 1 energy. It's got really nice synergy with the Martial Arts Dojo package to do extra damage. And this can get you a big burst damage of 100 plus depending on how many abilities your opponent has in play. And this sometimes lets you just take a crucial knockout without having to have your Decidueye in harm's way. It's useful in all sorts of situations. I'm still playing it even after the next set has come out. I think it's really good in this deck and helps in random situations like Mirror or facing other Altaria decks or facing something like Mad Party. This Hoopa is a very strong card overall. The last 2 tech attackers here are Tapu Fini and Basculin. These are both for fire decks specifically. We want to be able to try to compete against decks that play 2 Volcanions. That's my goal with this list, is to beat decks with 2 Volcanions, and potentially even Reshiram and Charizard, their GX attack can get through the ability here. So the way that we use these Pokemon here is attach a basic fighting preferably. The Pokemon and the energy are searchable with Rosa. The Martial Arts Dojo is searchable with Rosa. If you boost the damage, this tackle attack ends up doing 60 and then hits for weakness, which is 120, which is perfect math to knock out a Blacephalon or a Volcanion. Sanduscorch was pretty popular at the time, so I wanted to have an out to one-shotting Volcanions that doesn't involve putting my Decidueyes at risk. The Tapu Fini is for Blacephalon specifically. It can knock it out for any 1 energy. You don't even need to worry about getting fighting energy and Martial Arts Dojo. It's good for that. Also, if they bench Blacephalon and a Reshiram and Charizard at the same time, you can do 100 damage for 1 energy with the Martial Arts Dojo combo that can get up to 140 and one-shot a Reshiram Charizard GX if you're behind on prizes. So these techs do not win you the matchup by any means. They're still unfavorable. You have a lot of things working against you, and you have to draw into stuff at the right time in order to keep up. But they do give you a chance in the matchup, which is really important when you're playing a rogue deck. You do not want to take auto losses. You're okay with some auto losses, but not common ones. And in the spirit of maximizing your matchup spread, these techs are worth the spot at the time, even though I didn't end up facing any fire decks in the actual tournament. The Phione, this is a 1-card tech for Lucario Melmetal specifically. Occasionally it's useful in other situations. Mostly we use this Whirlpool Suction ability to put our Pokemon at the bottom of the deck, and this prevents us from decking out, because you can continue to draw it, bench it, use Whirlpool Suction again. So as long as they have more than 1 Pokemon in play, you can get essentially an infinite situation and never deck out. So when you have a complete stalemate like Lucario and Melmetal, after they've used their GX attack and they have Metal Goggles attached and you have resistance of -30, Splitting Arrow does 0 damage. You can't usually win that matchup by taking prizes unless something weird happens like your martial arts dojo sticks. But the Phione lets you auto win the matchup if you get one Decidueye out and they don't have any stealthy hoods or anything that can get in the way of Phione. Eventually you just win, and we'll see that in some of our later rounds. So with a rogue deck, if you can take an auto win against a meta matchup for one card, you do that 100% of the time. I'd say even 10% of the meta share, you want to get auto wins. That's the whole goal of the deck. So your tech slots should be chosen with that in mind, as opposed to maximizing consistency. Next up, we'll talk about the trainers. We have 2 Ordinary Rods. This gets back our Pokemon, and very importantly, our energies. We can get away with a lower energy count here because we can recycle it multiple times with Ordinary Rod. 2 is mainly so that you can find it when you need it. You can Rosa for it, but usually you want to be Rosaing for something else. So we play 2, has always felt perfect number for me. 4 Communication and 4 Quick Ball. These are very helpful in getting out basics early. Level Ball was not legal at the time of this tournament. I have added 2 of those into the list in addition to the 4 and 4. Getting out your basics is just that important. I've seen lists with less than 4 Pokemon Communication. I think that's absolutely incorrect. You need to get your Pokemon searched out. Not only does this get you basics early on in the game, the right basics, it also gets you Decidueyes without having to rely on Rosa. So play 4, it's the right call. Rare candies are there for getting Decidueyes out, obviously. If there is Vikavolt or other forms of item lock in the format, you want to play 1 Dartrix. At this time and at present, there's no item lock to speak of in standard format. Dartrix isn't worth the spot. It's just not useful enough. So we're very reliant on the candy. What this means is you have to be very careful about discarding them. You need to know how many in your deck, check your prizes early, and make sure you get enough Decidueyes out to win the game, because rare candy is your only way of doing that. Next up, we have 4 Scoop Up Nets. This is one of the best cards in the deck. It's useful in all sorts of situations, taking easy prizes off the bench. It lets you recycle Mewtwo to protect yourself from Marnie, lets you do extra damage with Zigzagoon, and it lets you get things out of the active so you can start attacking. Usually that's going to be Jirachi or Snorlax. The Scoop Up Net is your only switch out, so that's something to keep in mind. There's no way of getting a free retreat in this deck. The Bird Keeper is another way to switch. Between those two, I haven't felt the need for switch at all. Usually you want to be walling with one thing in the active for a long time anyway. So I think 4 Scoop Up Nets and 4 Bird Keepers is absolutely perfect. 2 Martial Arts Dojo. This is to boost our damage. It's important to note it can work with Decidueye as well. If you've attached a Grass and a Fighting Energy, you can do up to 130 damage plus damage spread with Splitting Arrow, which is very, very strong. Sometimes can put enough pressure on that you can win the prize race and not even have to wall indefinitely. So that makes the deck a lot more versatile in my opinion. It makes it feel like you're playing a real deck and not something that's just solely there to cheese matchups. Great synergy as well for Dojo with our water techs and our utility attacker Hoopa. Next up we have 4 Bird Keepers. I believe I was the first one to play heavy Bird Keeper in Decidueye's archetype. The reason we play this supporter is so that we can use this ability on Rowlet and provide early pressure on our opponent's threats. The single prize threats that can actually damage our Decidueyes, you want to knock them out while they're still on the bench. And ideally, you want to attach energies to a bench Rowlet that will later evolve into Decidueye and do damage through Decidueye's attack, but that takes multiple attachments. So the Bird Keeper allows you to pressure the opponent's threats while also setting up energy attachments on your own bench, which is incredibly valuable in the early turns. If they put down single prize attackers too early, such as a Spiritomb and Eternatus, you want to punish that as soon as possible. And Rowlet and Bird Keeper allow you to do that. This makes the deck viable. If you're solely relying on dodging techs or dodging counters, you're going to struggle. And we've seen that with Decidueye over and over again. You need to have an answer. So the answer that I've chosen is Bird Keeper with Rowlet and Decidueye that you can set up on the bench. This is another reason why I believe Decidueye as an archetype is so much stronger than Altaria. It's because you have the option to really lean into the Sky Circus ability, get early wind shards off, and threaten your opponent's bench that way. Now I will say wind shards become a lot less strong now that Mew is more heavily played in the format since the release of Rapid Strike Urshifu. That being said, it's still really good in the Eternatus matchup, which is one that is very close and one that you want to have good options for. Also, drawing 3 is pretty good, and the switch effect is also useful, getting you into your Jirachi for extra stellar wish draws, or getting back into Snorlax for another Gormandize. Bird Keeper, overall, very strong card. I wouldn't go less than 3. I played 3 before and it felt okay. In this build, I had extra spots that I was able to devote to consistency without sacrificing my matchup spread. Next up for supporters, we have 1 Boss's Order and 1 Marnie. The Boss Order, sometimes you'll use it to close out the game. Sometimes you'll use it to gust up an opponent's threat. This makes it that much better to have something like Hoopa in the deck that can attack for 1 damage and do a lot of energy, as you can make that play when you have your Boss's Order as opposed to having to dig for energy and then not having the Boss's Order in hand anymore. Now that there's more Mew in the format, you can consider going up to 2 Boss, but at this time 1 was perfect and very fine. The Marnie, this is an extra out to drawing cards early in the game. It's also another way to avoid decking out, and it adds just a touch of hand disruption, which can be useful in the late game at times, depending on the matchup. I don't think you need more than 1. There's been plenty of Decidueye decks that have played heavy Marnie. I don't think that's strong enough as a draw supporter. It's really difficult to get your rare candy and your Decidueye in your hand at the same time. You need Professor's Research to do that at all consistently. Usually you need Professor's Research and then a Stellar Wish to do it consistently. So Marnie is just not strong enough as an early game draw supporter to feature heavily in my decks. That's why I've gone for the 4 Professor's Research and 4 Rosa. This is to search out your Rare Candy Decidueye combo. It also lets you set up extra threats on the bench and gets us into our Dojo combo that we use to eliminate opponents' attackers that can actually damage us. Great card. I think if Rosa didn't exist, Altaria might be better than Decidueye just because of consistency reasons, but given that we have Rosa, the synergy here is just so strong. And there's often times where I'll put a Rosa on top of my deck with Mewtwo. Even after my opponent Marnies, I have a guaranteed Rare Candy Decidueye and Energy Attachment for the turn. I really like playing 4 Rosa. I've gone down to 3 with this as well because it doesn't draw you cards on the first turn of the game. But 4, definitely the deck feels better with 4. Aromatic Grass Energy. This is used to block special effects such as poison. Sometimes they'll try to cheese you with Crobat attack to poison you and slowly whittle you down. This is most common in the Eternatus matchup. These are not essential anymore. Back when you had the Poison Eternatus matchup, they would play, when that was an archetype, they would play the Poison package to do extra damage, and they didn't play Yveltal to discard your Aromatics. So these 2 would auto-win the Poison Eternatus matchup. Now that those are gone, I've actually cut the aromatic energies from my most recent build, but at this time, there's still the option of playing against Poison Eternatus. You want to make that an auto-win, so you play 2 aromatics. It's not the worst thing in the world to draw into. It counts as your grass energy in other matchups, so definitely worth the space as a tech at this time. This rather thin energy count, we have 2 capture energies. This helps us get basics out early. You want to focus in your early game on getting set up. So a lot of times what this means is capture energy the active Rowlet or Mew if you start one of those, something with 1 retreat cost. You capture energy to get Jirachi or Snorlax, and then immediately you retreat into it. You have all game to attach energies. What you want is to get multiple basics down early. That's your goal in the early game. We have ways of catching up in regards to energy attachments. So that's what I love using the capture energy for. It just gets you more basics out. Absolutely worth the 2 spots. The fighting energy is for martial arts dojo synergy exclusively. None of our Pokemon attack for fighting energy, but it's really good in the deck. And then the 3 grass energy, you can't go any lower than 3 basic grass because you may attach 1 early or discard 1 early, and then if you have 1 prized, you need to have at least 3. So this is absolutely the lowest, even with the ordinary rods. 3 basic grass energy so that your Rosa is essentially always live. So that'll do it for the deck profile. I hope you stick around in the future as we go through my rounds. Thanks. Hope you have a great day.